这边的这是题目，然后这是答案，然后这是纸上图。
这个灯帮我关掉哈。我们这学期的课程有没有出席的分数啊？我是说总成绩里面有没有出席的占比？譬如说出席成绩占5%或10%之类的，有吗？好，我好像找不到我们第一次上课的投影片。好，那我们那个如果有出席的分数，今天好像来教室的同学比较少哦，我们可以借由这个发考卷的方式，当做一次点名成绩。好，那助教帮我先确认一下哦。好，那我们先看一下那个这次的我们分数的分布。哦，5%，好 ，OK， 好。好，那这次期中考呢，平均是80分，然后这个 STD 是13分，哦，所以这个标准差其实这个分数差距还蛮大的哦，最高整16，最低40，好，那大家可以看到这个分数的分布，它并不是中型分布哦，反而是在这个90分、95分、85分的同学的比例都蛮高的。好，代表我们的题目是不是有一点太简单了？好，所以这个大家分数都非常的高哦。好，那我们这个期末考的目标是希望能够把它拉成是我们的常态分布。好，这个最好 pick 是在这个75到80左右，然后向两边递减。好，这样可能是一个比较正常的分数分布。好，所以大家会觉得题目太简单了吗？好，因为越高分越好嘛，是不是？好，那我们就来发一下考卷，好，顺便认识一下同学，顺便当一点名哦。好，谢明元，好，同学马上在点分，这个点名就领先了其他同学了哈。林轩宇，好。这个就是我们最高分96分的同学哦。好，大家掌声鼓励一下。等一下老师邀请你出来跟大家分享一下怎么得高分的诀窍哈，你先准备一下。好，一脸嘉云是吗？是吗？杨凯。好，赶快出来拿呀！好，李崇一，邱佩英，好，同学上课都很沉默啊，但是考试都考得不错啊。邱冠珍，王俊文， 张志伟、张庭伟。好，这个做前面的人果然都考得很高分了。好，林志宇，你看低分的就不来这样。吕承佑、魏庭如，啊，在这里坐在前面的没有人低于90分。好，庄顺宏。好，我记得老师有跟大家讲哦，就是你教室坐的位置跟你的成绩会息息相关哦。坐的越前面，多少分数都越高。啊，因为这个投影看得越清楚，然后老师的声音听得越清楚哦。伊俊伟，好，没有来哦。张耀俊，张君伟，廖子清，吴松宇，好，赖义成，刘德义，郑俊良，张冠松，不确定是不是那个结尾是0042还是扣？好，有吗？结尾0042没有哦。蔡安林，没有。好，刘俊元，陈达祥，吴敏荣。好，通常坐在那个位置都是全班最低分。好，这个吴同学不错啊。好，倪玉伟，黄博翰，杨博勋，李承恩，何培慈，黄玉婷，郭品秀，杨于范，周凯一，徐巧荣，你怎么穿的这么美？叶淑芬，蔡梦洁。好，有没有今天有来上课的同学，但是没有拿到考卷的？叶淑芬、蔡梦洁。好，那这些就帮我注记今天学习哦。好，那我们看看那个，刚助教已经有在 eCourse 上公布答案了。好，同学看看题目里面有没有觉得哪里有问题，需要我们再讲解的。好， 那你当时在作答的时候有注记哪一题比较奇怪，不太确定答案的，好，需要我们再讨论的部分，有吗？有没有需要讨论的？好，那如果没有的话，我们那个期末考还是照这样的形式，同学们有没有什么建议需要调整的地方？我们会稍微再难一点点啦，哈，分数有一点太高了哈。那除了难易度之外，同学们有没有其他建议的事情？有都可以讲，没关系。有吗？好，没有的话，我们期末考就照这样咯。好。好，那个大家看一下自己的考卷，好，譬如说有没有加错分的地方，或者是你比照我们的公布的标准答案有发现有改错的，好，可以把你要申诉的事项写在考卷封面的右上角。那助教收回来之后呢，我们会重新看看有没有需要调整分数的地方。好，那等一下下课之前呢，不论你有没有写申诉的事项，我们的考卷都要收回来。好，所以请大家可以看看有没有改错的地方。好，那记得那个助教下课前把考卷再全部都收回来，这样。Right. For Unit 5, I'm going to talk about more of audio and music processing. So let's see the AI tool to help us produce new music. Okay, have you used Suno AI before? Okay, so you can write your own description and ask this AI tool to create music for you. For example, this is I produced like 3 minutes ago. Okay, to produce a song about Christmas. So my description is, please create a Christmas song that is very touching, that is very warming, and describe the scene about getting together with families. So it's a very happy atmosphere. Okay, so this tool was produced 2 songs for me. Okay, so let's see.
着雪，一片白茫茫。手中的行李袋是回家的方向。车站人声嘈杂，心却暖洋洋。每一步靠近，每一份期盼，家里的灯光已经在呼唤。这是回家的圣诞夜。
Okay, it's more like that. Okay, just like 2 or 3 minutes, then we can produce a song very quickly. So I'd like to introduce someone to give us a sample of description. What kind of song you want to produce? Then we can apply this Suno AI tools to help us produce the new song. Okay. Anyone? 中文或英文都可以哦。So I forget our high school students. Okay. Okay. Please come forward to share how to get high score of midterm examination to everyone. Please. Let's welcome.
notebook 因为多刷题，多刷题目就这样。
所以产生了多少题目出来刷？
一章节的话，差不多8组1组20几题。
所以你产生了用 notebook 会产生很多题目来当做模拟考。
差不多。
那你觉得重复的比例有多高？
如果是在一次性生成的话，重复比例，我不确定到底有多少题，可是确实蛮高的。那可是如果你在不同天生的话，它差异性会蛮大的。可是如果你在同一批生的话，就是重复性会蛮高的。
OK， 所以那个期中考题你在刷题中有多少比例是看过的？
其实我不确定，只是就都蛮像的，没有到，就有一些确实没有看过，只有一部分是蛮像的。
Okay, thank you. Please hold on. Could you provide your song description? 怎么样？ Okay, it sounds a little bit too general. Okay, let me give you another example. For example, I would like to create a very horrible songs about the witches. Okay, so it sounds very dark, very silent. Perhaps happens in the midnight. Okay, I'm not kidding because I'm actually produce the song. For example, 所以他自己产生了《黑夜巫师》这个歌给我这样because I just described the atmosphere, the scenery, to how to create the song. Okay, so could you provide a more concrete situations to generate the song? Okay. Okay. Any adjective more? In Okay, let's create the song. So let's do this.
光が消える鼓動だけが声を上げる破れた夢のかけらを集めそれでも前に進む力を叫べば響くこの無
Okay, are you satisfied with this song? Okay, right. So today we are going to watch the video how to generate the music because you can see the AI tool can help us create all kinds of songs. Okay, so let's see the video today.
In the 6th century BC, Pythagoras, yes, that's Pythagoras, proposed a concept called the music of the spheres to describe the proportional movements of celestial bodies like the sun, moon, and planets. This music is not thought of as being literally audible, but instead a mathematical concept. Math and music are intrinsically connected. The field of algorithmic composition dates back to the early days of computer science. Translation models take an existing non-musical medium, like a picture, and translate it into a sound. These are usually rule-based, so a rule may be that if it sees a horizontal line in an image, it'll interpret that as a constant pitch, whereas a vertical line represents an ascending scale. Evolutionary models are based off of genetic algorithms. Through mutation and natural selection, different solutions evolve towards a suitable composition. Then there's the learning model. By providing it musical data instead of rules, we can let it learn for itself how to create music. We're fast approaching the point where we'll no longer have to wonder how Mozart or Jimi Hendrix would have composed a piece on a certain topic. We'll just be able to ask their algorithmic counterparts ourselves. Hello world, it's Siraj, and today we're going to use deep learning to generate some jazz music. The first attempt by anyone to use a computer to compose music was by two American professors at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Hiller and Isaacson. They programmed the university's ILLIAC computer to compose music, and it generated pitches using random numbers before testing them according to the rules of classical counterpoint. So if a pitch didn't fit a piece, another note was generated. It also relied on probabilities via a Markov chain. It used the past to determine the probabilities of the future. The first piece was completed in 1957 and was called the ILLIAC Suite for String Quartet. Although it made headlines in Scientific American, the musical establishment was pretty hostile to them. They thought it undermined human creativity and didn't include them in their journals until after Hiller's death. Nowadays, there are a ton of amazing generative programs for composers to aid them when they compose music. Like iTunes? Let's understand this process by building a model to generate jazz pieces using Keras. We'll first examine the music we're going to train our model on. Our input data is going to be a collection of piano pieces by American jazz musician Pat Metheny in MIDI format. MIDI, or Musical Instrument Digital Interface, is like the digital alphabet for music. It contains a list of messages that tell an electronic device, like a sound card, how to generate a certain sound. So it doesn't store actual sounds itself, which lends to a much smaller file. Since these messages are a sequence, we'll use a recurrent network as our sequence learning learning model. For each MIDI file, we'll extract the stream of notes for both the melody and the harmony. The harmony's chords accompany the melody's single notes. Then we'll group them all together by measure number. So each measure has its own grouping of chords, and this measure chord pair is what we'll call our abstract grammars. We'll vectorize these inputs by converting them into binary matrices so we can feed them into our model. Now we can build our model. This is going to be a double-stacked LSTM network, so our computation graph will look like this. The vectorized sequence of notes will be input into the first LSTM cell, then we'll apply dropout to help ensure that the model generalized well. And we'll do that process one more time. Then we'll feed the data to our last fully connected layer labeled dense. Since every neuron in the previous layer is connecting to every neuron in this layer, it will mix all the learned signals together so our prediction is truly based on the whole input sequence. We'll lastly transform the result with a softmax activation function into an output probability for what is likely the next note in the sequence. When we build our first LSTM layer, by default, it will only return the last vector rather than the entire sequence. So we set return sequences to true so that it returns the entire sequence, which is necessary to be able to stack another LSTM later on. Using 2 LSTM layers instead of 1 allows for a more complex feature representation of the input, which means more generalization ability and thus a better prediction. Recall that recurrent networks are essentially like a series of feed-forward networks that are connected to each other. The output of each and its hidden layer is fed into the next one, and when we backpropagate, with each layer, the magnitude of the gradients gets exponentially smaller, which makes the steps also very small, which results in a very slow learning rate of the weights in the lower layers of a deep network. This is the vanishing gradient problem, and LSTM recurrent nets help solve that by preserving the error that can be backpropagated through time and layers. Let's look a little closer at this process, but first I gotta say,
LSTM, say it again. LSTM, say it again. When data goes in, it forgets the BS, remembers the good stuff, then outputs the rest. LSTM, say it again.
An LSTM cell consists of 3 gates: the input, forget, and output, as well as a cell state. The cell state is like a conveyor belt. It just lets memory flow across unchanged, except for a few minor linear interactions. These interactions are the gates. We can add or remove memory from the cell state regulated by them. They optionally let memory through. Each is a sigmoid neural net layer in a multiplication operation. The sigmoid outputs a value between 0 and 1, which describes how much of each component should be let through. We'll represent each of the gates with the following equations, where W is the set of weights at each gate. The way its internal memory changes is similar to piping water through a pipe. So think of memory as water. It flows into a pipe. If we want to change the memory flow, this change is controlled by 2 valves. The forget valve first. If we shut it, no old memory will be kept. If we keep it open, all old memory will pass through. The other is the new memory valve. New memory comes in through a T-shaped joint and merges with the old memory, and the amount of new memory that comes in is controlled by this valve. The input is an old memory, and it passes through the forget valve, which is actually a multiplication operation. The old memory hits the T-shaped joint pipe, which represents a summation operation. New and old memory merge through this operation. In total, this updates the old memory to the new memory. We'll define our loss function as categorical cross-entropy. The cross-entropy between 2 probability distributions measure the average number of bits needed to identify an event from a set of possibilities. Since our data is fed in sequences, this measures the difference between the real next note and our predicted next note. We'll minimize this loss function using RMS prop, which is an implementation of stochastic gradient descent. So we'll predict the next note in the sequence over and over again until we have a sequence of generated notes. We'll translate this into MIDI format and write it to a file so we can listen to it. Let's hear what this sounds like. At least it's better than Kenny G, so we're all good. So to break it down, we can generate music using LSTM networks to predict sequences of notes. LSTMs consist of 3 gates: the input, forget, and output gate. And we can think of these gates as valves, controlling how memory is stored in our network to eliminate vanishing gradients. The winner of the coding challenge from the last video is Vishal Bachu. Not only did he perform multiple style
Right. This video talks a lot about the music, the note, the representation, and the model. So could you summarize the idea behind this video, how to generate music by like one or two sentences? What is the idea? Okay. Mm. All right. Basically, that's a pre-processing step. We need to transform the music to the notation of MIDI first, and then we can use different MIDI notes as the input into the model. For example, STM. Okay. So the model STM actually is represent a sequence prediction model. So you can predict any sequence by the given input. So you can think of, for example, we have a clip of music. Once we transform the music into the MIDI representation, so we have the note, for example, G4 or F5 or something. And then we can, based on this given input video clip, music clip, then LSTM help us to predict what our next note. For example, if you input, for example, 10 video note, music note, then LTM will output, for example, 20 music note or 5 music note. So once you have a long sequence, you can separate the video music clip into the LTM model, and then it can produce a sequence of long music note. That is how the music is generated. Okay, so actually, a sequential prediction model is very useful for our daily life. For example, you can predict, for example, temperature. What is the temperature tomorrow or tomorrow after tomorrow? Okay, so if we have historical data, for example, 7 weeks, we have the temperature, for example, 22 degree, 20 degree, or 32 degree. So we have sequence data and use as the input to the LSTM model, then maybe it can help us predict 3 days of the weather temperature. So from the website, you can see we have weather forecasting website, right? You can check what is the forecasted results of either raining, sunny, or temperature of next 7 days. It's also the application of LSTM models. Okay, so the idea to generate music is once we have a complete video music songs, then we can use the sequence as our input, and then we can separate the music clip into different sequences. Okay, if the total sequence, if we have 1,000 notes, okay, then we can separate, for example, overlapping music clips with 10 notes, 10 notes, and 10 notes. Okay. Then we can use this data as input to the LSTM model. So once we have 10 notes as input to LSTM, so the LSTM will output, for example, 10 music notes for us. So if you use the original input or random input as this 10 notes clips as input to LSTM, then it will produce 10, 10, 10 music notes in this overlapping fashion. Then maybe you can merge or fuse this output as a complete song. Okay, that's how music generation works. But nowadays we have many advanced models to like for sequence prediction or music generation. So this is just one simple example. Okay, so if you are interested in this AI model, how to predict sequential data or how to generate music, welcome to join the course Machine Learning next semester. Okay, today I'm going to introduce chapter 5, digital audio processing. So in this chapter, we will see what is dynamic processing, how to process audio clips, and how to apply audio restoration method to eliminate noises of the audio clip. Okay, firstly, let's see different audio file format. I'm not sure if you have seen this file extension before. .aac, .au, .mp3 are maybe the most commonly used file format for audios. And we also have .rm or .wave or .wav. Okay, WASF. Okay, I remember this format. We have used this format like 25 years ago. It's very popular to use the file extension proposed by Microsoft. So actually, WAV, Microsoft Windows Media Audio. Okay, so that's the extension for this file. Okay, next let's see what is dynamic processing. Okay, it's the process to adjust dynamic range of an audio selection either to reduce or increase the difference between the loudest and the softest passage. Okay, so if you remember the definition of audio clips, we are talking about amplitude. That's the power or intensity of the audio clips to see how strong or how soft of the video clips. So when you have accomplished your previous project assignment, when you sing or speak, you can see the amplitude provided from the audio recorders. We are talking about how to increase the loudest part and softest part. Okay, so for example, this is the audio recorder. Okay, when you sing, maybe you will see the waves like this. Okay, so if this is the middle line, then what is the loudest part and softest part? Okay, so maybe this is the loudest part. This one is the softest part. Actually, we can calculate the distance from the loudest part to the softest part. So that is what we call a dynamic range. Okay, we're trying to adjust dynamic range of the loudest part and softest part. Then we can create different atmosphere. For example, if the dynamic range is very narrow, then what happened? How do you feel about this music clip? We have very narrow dynamic range. So you may see something like this. Okay, so the loudest part and softest part, we have very narrow dynamic range. So usually you will feel sleepy, right? Because it produces almost the same sounds for you. Okay, so I would like to invite someone to ask me to answer a very interesting questions. Okay, maybe you? Okay, so tell me about the professors in our department whose lectures has the narrowest range of dynamic range. if you need to choose one among all professors about our department, whose voice has low dynamic range to you? Okay, so how will you describe his dynamic range? Okay, good. That's what I want to hear. Okay. So who has the highest dynamic range? Maybe you can give some examples. Or you think all of them are low dynamic range? Okay, how about the student sitting next to you? Who has the highest dynamic range to you? All the professors in our department. Really? Really? Oh, I don't believe you. Okay. So, based on these two examples, you can see one is dynamic range. Okay. So the range of the loudest is of this part. Okay. Next, we would like to see some terms. The increase of amplitude is sometimes called gain or boost, and the decrease of the amplitude is called attenuation or a cut. So we will see different methods later. If you see these keywords to boost or to cut, then it means to increase the dynamic range or decrease the dynamic range. Next, I would like to introduce 4 different dynamic processing tools: harm limiting, normalization, compression, and expansion. Okay, the first one is limiting. Okay, audio limiting to limit the amplitude of audio signal to some level. So the first method is called hard limiting. We also call that clipping. We cut the amplitude of the sample to a given maximum or minimum level. So maybe we can see this figure. If we have the original signal, so just like I said, if we raise our voice, we have large amplitude. And when we whisper, then we have a very low amplitude. But if we have a given maximum and minimum threshold, then we cut the audio clips out of this range. So this is what we call hard clipping. Okay, so in this case, you can see the amplitude over the threshold, below or above the threshold, then they all clip, okay, to the same level. So we call this hard clipping. And also we have soft limiting. Audio signals above the certain amplitude level are recorded at lower amplitude. Okay, so you can see, actually this part is over the threshold. So instead, we use a different amplitude to record the original audio clip. So you can see we can preserve the original shape of the audio clip. We call this soft clipping. The next one is normalization. Normalization is used to increase the perceived loudness of a piece after the dynamic range of the piece has been compressed. Okay, so we involve 2 different approaches. We increase the loudness, but we also have the approach of compression. So let's see the step. The first step is to find the highest amplitude of the audio selection, and then we determine the gain we needed to increase the amplitude. So we can raise the highest amplitude to the maximum level, and then we raise all samples in this selection by this amount. Okay, maybe we can use the figure to understand this process. Okay, if we have an audio clip like this, okay, if the highest amount of amplitude is 10 dB, for example, okay, and then this is the first step to find the highest amplitude, and then we need to determine the gain we needed to increase the amplitude. So if we want to increase the highest dB, for example, 10 to 15 dB, okay, then we can see the amount for raising is 5 dB. Okay, and then we jump to the third step. We raise all samples in this selection by this amount. So like this. Okay, so this part we raise to highest 15 dB, and with the other samples, they all raise by 5 dB in this case. Okay, so we call this normalization because based on the highest results, we normalize all samples to the range when we raise the highest amplitude to the amount of gain. Okay, let's hear this example. Okay, and after dynamic processing using normalization. Okay, so based on this figure, you can see maybe the highest amplitude is here. So we just raise the highest amplitude to the position here. So each sample is raised by the same amount of that gain. Okay, that's what we call normalization. By this example, you can see the bossa nova sounds louder after normalization. Okay, next, the converse operation is compression. Okay, so based on the similar operations, we can also design maybe 10 dB goes down to 5 dB. So all samples is decreased by 5 dB. Okay, next let's see the combination of compression and normalization. Okay, so I'd like all of you to think of the problem. What's the difference between we apply normalization directly or we apply compression plus normalization? Because we all achieve the goal to increase the gain of the entire song to some level. Okay, so what's the difference? When we apply normalization to make the maximum amplitude to, for example, 15 dB, and we can also apply compression to make the whole audio collection to a minimum range, and then we apply normalization again to make the highest amplitude to this level, 15 dB. Okay, what's the difference between these two approaches? Anyone? Maybe we can hear the results again. Maybe you can hear something and discover the secret. This is the results when we apply normalization directly. Right? Any difference? Very good. So you can see more details when we apply compression plus normalization. Because based on these two figures, actually you can compare the visualization results directly. If we compress the original audio to a narrow range and then we apply normalization, actually the amount of gain will be a little bit larger than when we apply normalization directly. Okay, so you can hear more detail. For example, the drum. Okay, so maybe you can check this figure or the audio clip by yourself. All right. Next one is compression. So why do we need to compress the dynamic range of music? Okay, so we can take radio for example. Usually the background noises in your car, such as tires humming. So when you drive the car or when you stay inside the car, you can hear the engine or hear the tires humming. So if the difference of the loudest and softest part is large, then the softest part will be drawn out by noises. You cannot hear the details or the sound with softest amplitude. Okay, so for this reason, radio music is usually dynamically compressed and then the amplitude is raised overall. Okay, so that's what we talk about because usually we cannot hear the softest part or the details if we are in a very noisy environment. So by compression plus normalization, then we can hear more details. Okay, next let's see the price we should pay for dynamic compression. The first term is takt time. Okay, so it is the time that it takes for the sound to change amplitude. Just like we said, if we change the loudest part to a relatively soft part, we need some time to complete the transition. So the transition time is what we call a takt time. So let's think of if we have a very fast takt time, the sound reaches high amplitude suddenly and then drop off quickly, such as the percussion. So if you hit the drum, you can hear boom, boom, boom. Okay, so that's a very quick or fast attack time from the silent to a very large amplitude. So that's very quick attack time when you hit the drum. Okay, so fast attack percussion songs like drum are called transient. Okay, so dynamic compression leaves little headroom, the room for transient to stand out with higher amplitudes and make music sounds dull and flat. Okay, so that's what we call because when we apply dynamic compression, that means we make the dynamic range very short. Okay, the range is very narrow. Okay, so if the range is very narrow, then we have little headroom, or we need to accomplish from the softest part to highest part within a very short time. Okay, so it sounds like very dull or flat, just like the sound of drum, dong dong dong. Okay, so it looks so boring. Okay, so we call that sound dull or flat. Okay, let's see the combination of compression and expansion. So we have 4 different combinations of this keyword. The first one is downward compression and upward compression. Okay, and then we have upward expansion and downward expansion. So maybe we can use this figure to understand these 4 methods. Okay, so if we have a larger dynamic range and we want to compress the dynamic range to a relatively narrow range, then the loudest part we can apply downward compression from this level to this level. On the contrary, if we have the softest part and we want to compress to a narrow dynamic range, then we need to raise this level to this level. So we call this upward compression. Okay, so in the end, they are all compression methods because we're trying to make this dynamic range to a narrow range of this part. Okay, so for the loudest part and softest part, we are applying downward and upward compression respectively. Okay, let's see the second case. If we have this audio clip and we want to enlarge its dynamic range, then we can apply upward extension for the loudest part to an even higher level. And for the softest part, we can apply downward extension to make it an even soft part. So you can see the keyword expansion or compression. Actually, we are trying to maximize or minimize the dynamic range. Okay, so maybe we can see this description. Downward compression, we are lower the amplitude of signals that are above a certain level without changing the amplitude of signals below the level, and it reduces the dynamic range. Okay, so if you can think of the figure, what is downward compression? Actually, we are lower the amplitude when it's above a certain level. All right, so let's see another keyword, noise floor. The points below which audio signal is no longer audible. Okay, so for the softest part, maybe we have a threshold. If the amplitude is below that threshold, the audio signal is no longer audible. So we call that threshold noise level, noise floor. Okay, next let's see the linear transfer function to adjust the gain, or we can cut the amplitude. So we call this linear transfer function because you have seen this transfer function before for intensity, right? So we can apply pixel point processing method using this linear transformation method. Then we can transform intensity from 0 to 155 to another range. So in this case, we can also apply transfer function to audio clips. Once we have the original range of amplitude, for example, minus 96 dB to 0 dB, then based on this transformation function, we can move minus 96 dB to, for example, this point, minus 90 dB. Okay, then this means we are applying the gain of this audio clip. And we can also apply the cut of this audio clip once we apply this linear transfer function. Okay, practically you can see the application like this. Actually, we may apply different linear transfer function for this audio clip if it goes above a given threshold or below the threshold. In this case, you can see this is the original transformation function, but if it's above, this is 40 dB. Okay, and then we apply another transfer function, which is marked by this red lines. Okay, so you can see there are two different linear function because we may have the ratio, for example, 1 to 1 or 2 to 1 to adjust the ratio after double compression. Okay, if we want to apply upward compression, then we can use such a linear function. The amplitude below minus 30 dB will compress by 2 by 1 ratio. Okay, so why is 2 by 1? Because when you expand this line, then you can see the segment of this one and this one is 1 by 1. Okay. So we call this upward compression because actually we are trying to raise the amplitude from this point to this point, for example. Okay, so we are trying to compress the dynamic range. However, for the surface part, we are applying upward compression. Okay, so it's all about how we adjust the dynamic range. So if you find out the professor, his tone or speaking with very narrow dynamic range, maybe you can apply this method to make his tone higher dynamic range. Okay, let's see the topic audio restoration. So the restoration aims to alleviate the background noises that arises from the microphone or air or things or the environment. Okay, so actually we are trying to eliminate background noises. This method is what we call audio restoration. Next, we have three methods: noise gating, noise reduction, and clip and pop removal. Let's see noise gating. Okay, the noise gate allows the signal to pass through when it's above a set threshold. Okay, so by this figure, you can see we have output level and input level, and then we have a threshold here. Okay, so this tells us once the amplitude is above the threshold, then the output is allowed to be outputted. For example, you can see for the blue line, it's the original level of audio, but it's below the threshold. Okay, so we cannot have any output because it's not over the threshold. So the output level remains 0. Okay, so at this time point, you can see the input level becomes higher, and it's higher than the threshold. Okay, so it's allowed audio to output because it's over the threshold. But we don't output audio clip immediately because it will sound very strange because originally it's silent and suddenly we have a very loud noise. So usually we have a time to allow the noise to appear to its original level. So this time is what we call a tag time. So you can see at this time, the audio clip is already above the threshold. But you can see we gradually enlarge the audio clip to this input level. Okay, and then you can see it goes on and the amplitude is still above the threshold. So we have the output just following the original amplitude. Okay, and then we can see at this time, the amplitude goes lower than the threshold. So we have another time we call hold. Okay, hold means even it's below the threshold, but we don't want to cut the sound immediately. So we hold this audio clip for a certain of time steps. And then we gradually lower this audio clip to the amplitude of 0. So we call this release time. Okay, so based on the design of noise gating, actually we can apply the threshold to eliminate the noises because the background noises is usually with low amplitude. Once we set the threshold, then the noises cannot appear of this audio clip. And with the design of a head time, hold, and release time, we can make the change of amplitude, the transition is more smoothly. Okay, so let's see the reduction level. Okay, amplitude to which you want the below threshold samples to be reduced. Okay, that's our threshold. And then we have attack, release. The release time indicates how quickly you want the gate to close. So it's like the effect of fade out. So we have seen the effect of fade out for like PowerPoint. If you switch the pages of PowerPoint, you can apply the effect fade out. Actually, we can apply the same effect to audio clips. Okay, so let's see the problem of noise gating. If the signal keeps moving back and forth around the threshold, then the gate will open and close continuously. So it creates effects like chatters. So open, close, and you can hear the sound and keep silent. So it's not a good situation. So let's see this example. If we set the threshold level here, okay, then we have the output level and input level. So you can see originally input level is below the threshold. So based on the noise gating, it's not output. So the output level remains 0. And then when it goes up and above the threshold, then it allows to output. So we have the output signal like this. However, when it goes below the threshold, then we keep the output level to be 0. So in this case, you can see if we have the signal just goes up, down, up and down around the threshold, then we have the audio clip open, close, open, close, open, close. Okay, so for humans, you will feel uncomfortable when we have these chatter situations. Okay, so we have another design to deal with this problem. We call this hysteresis control. Okay, actually we have two different thresholds, N and M. Okay, one is open threshold and one is closed threshold. If the amplitude level is above the open threshold, then the output is open. Then, when it goes below the closed threshold, then we count the output to 0. Okay, let's see. We have the same audio clip here. When the input level is below the open threshold, it means the output is cut to 0. So we have output level 0 until the level goes up. So when it goes up, then closed threshold is no use because it should goes over the open threshold, then it's allowed to output. Okay, so when it goes higher, then from this part it is already above the open threshold. Then we have output level here. Okay, so you can see when it goes down and below the open threshold, it's okay because it's not reached the threshold of closed threshold, so it's not closing yet. Okay, so you can see when it goes up, down, around the open threshold, it's allowed to output until it goes down and below the closed threshold, then it's cut to 0. So after that time, you can see the audio signals goes up, down, and up, but it's not over the open threshold, so it remains closed. And the level remains 0 until it goes above the open threshold. So for these two cases, you can see, if you compare the output threshold by this red dot line, then you can see we have open, close, open, close, open, close situations. But by this hysteresis control, we have the output, the close and output, then we close, then we have the output. So we won't have challenge situations if we have this control mechanism. All right, let's see if you have any questions so far. Okay, if no questions, then I remember previously I will give different amplitude numbers and then set the open and close threshold and ask you to draw these curves to see when it's open and when it will output and when it will be cut. Okay, for final examination. So maybe you can try yourself about different examples. All right, if no question, let's take a break for 15 minutes.
就是要说它的time out code已经到对，但是现在它也有应该是对。
好，我看一下哈。看来 LZW 的演算法，如果 initial 的 color table 是 color 6，然后呢，这个系统发现的 sequence yellow， 如果 y 是5的话，而且把它加到 table 当做 code 7。Then what is the first code output for the sequence yellow, green? 如果一开始就已经有6个颜色了，然后
他又把 yellow 加到后期，所以它已经在那个颜色。
对，
然后看到 yellow 的时候。
所以他看到 yellow green 的时候会 output 多少，是不是？对。What is the first code output for the sequence？ 所以这个意思是说，就是黄色、绿色，这是一个新的 pattern 嘛。所以我们看到新的 pattern 的时候，其实是要把它放到 table 的新的一个格子里面去，然后我们会 output 这个 window 里面已经有的 pattern， 那这个 window 里面前面有的 pattern 就是 yellow， 那如果 yellow 它的 code 是7的话，应该就会 output 7。
但答案说它是4，所以就觉得
OK， 那好啊，好，那我们请助教收回来之后再来调整好了。好。
然后有什么我想问，就是他是说就是哪一个会复制个人发文，然后又是去使用。对。那这个不是也是
Often resulting in blackness replication。因为 nearest neighbor interpolation 它不会 repeating rows 跟 columns。
它不是会复制最近的。
但是题目是要求它要把整个行跟整个列复制。那会复制整个行跟整个列的方法就是 replication。好。
这个我也喜欢。
怎么样？对。
我算出来的答案，应该它在上面是完全没有。
我也是。
OK。好，那我们再回来圈一下好。那个，你帮我记一下75题跟81题。好。
我问一下这个。 好，87题。
好 B 是可以的，但是 C 应该也是1万。
好，我看一下。好，它被用 SDYT 来定义，它 performance is bad in the sources to draw the continuous curve. OK，B 是把所有的参数画出来。C 是什么 ？Using the recursive step of indication until the points are close enough. 我再看一下题目哈。可以。好，加上87题标。好，
我再看17题。
好，没什么问题。
我这样晚来，所以没有点到你跟他。
好，没关系，那你跟助教拿考卷，然后请助教帮你修改点名记录，变成10号。好。好，来，好。Emphasize if a user saves a photo JPEG with Q 等于10 then later we save the same image as PNG. What is the most likely outcome? 所以 the PNG will be larger than JPEG. ，PNG will be larger than JPEG. 你是选 C 是不是？超声一下才能对。
现在是传承这 PEG， 然后再转 PNG。
对。对，但是它的传承 PNG 的时候，它已经有用一个 lossless 的 compression 了，所以它还是一个 compression 的方法。所以等于是它经过了2次的 compression。对，所以我觉得答案应该是 PNG 会比 JPEG 小才对，这样。
JPEG 不是已经有做过一次 lossless 的
compression？JPEG 是 lossless 的 compression。
不会做一次有损，再做一次。
对。
那这样 PNG 再做一次没有意义。
没有意义，它只是要问你做了这个没意义的举动之后，它的 file size 前后比较会差多少？
应该会等于50，因为你做JPEG 已经做过一次，就有损无损压缩，然后 PNG 再做一次。
但是它其实做无损压缩还是会压缩。无损压缩会压缩，只是你可以把压缩完的东西解回原本的东西，可以解回跟原本一样的东西。但是无损压缩也是压缩，它的 size 也是会变小这样。
JPEG 已经做过一次，那你 PNG 做一次，那它的
可以啊。
它序列不是长得还是一样？
没有，对，就像是我们在介绍 JPEG compression 的时候，其实我们做完 DCT 之后，后面还是会用 Huffman coding 再压一次，对不对？那 Huffman coding 本身就是 lossless 的做法嘛。对啊。所以其实你如果连压2次的话，理论上应该是会变得更小。对。
这是 D。
好，95再记一下。
好。
好。
所以记下来题目是有问题的。
对，我们回去讨论一下，然后帮同学改一下分数这样。
好。要把这个刚刚可能有没有错的是对的，要写在题目。
我们会一起，我们收回来之后会统一一起看，不用特别写，我们一起请助教记下来。好。没有了吗？好。我们回去再讨论一下这4题的答案，我们再确认一下，然后再帮同学把分数调整一下，这样。
哦，你说我这样子，还是像你？让我看一下，为什么是这个？这好像会禁止自拍，超像。因为我没有这么自恋。你妈，我没有这么自恋。因为你气间里面呢，你也会吐进塞进去的时候，它就吐气出来。哦。吐气会吐。
Alright, next let's see noise reduction. So let's see the steps for noise reduction directly. The first step, get a profile of background noise, and this can be done by selecting an area that should be silent and contains a hum or buzz. So just like when you are recording yourself, initially maybe we have 2 or 3 seconds of silence, but it's not totally silent because we may record the background noises. So it's just like okay, so when you record yourself speaking or talking, so maybe initially we have the background noises, and then you start to speak something. So we may have the audio clip like this. So we're talking about by this 2 or 3 seconds. Actually, we are recording the background noises. Okay, so that is what we call a profile. Okay, what is the amount of background noises we can select that segment, and then we can determine the frequency in the noise and their corresponding amplitude level. So by Fourier transform, we can transform this segment to frequency analysis view in your previous homework assignment. Then we can see what are the major frequency components of the background noise. And then we jump to the third step. The internal signal is processed in sections using Fourier analysis, and the frequency in each section are analyzed and compared to the profile. Because we have extract this background noises, and then we determine its frequency component. Okay, so maybe we can compare the other segments to the profile of background noises. And then if the segments contain frequency components similar to the noise, they can be eliminated or below certain amplitude. Okay, so usually the background noises belongs to high frequency components. Okay, so if this is 0 hertz, this is 20,000 hertz, for example. Usually background noise, we may have the profile like this. Okay, because noises is usually high frequency components. So maybe we can compare each segments when we apply Fourier transform to see the frequency analysis view. Then we can compare to the profile to see if we have 20,000 hertz, we have such components, then maybe we can eliminate from the original after segments. Okay, this helps us to eliminate all frequency components belongs to background noises to the current audio segments. Okay, I think this is a very simple and straightforward method we can deal with background noises. Once we can transform the audio to frequency domain, then we can eliminate the profiles of background noises. Okay, so let's see. For this example, it's also something like Barcelona, but when this audio clip is finished, then we should have several seconds of silent period. But if we can also record some amplitude here, that means that belongs to background noises. Okay, and then we can further analyze the frequency components of such silent segments to know the profile of background noises. Okay, so let's hear. This is before noise reduction. This is after noise reduction. You can see the effect is very apparent. Okay, we can reduce all these frequency components of noises. Okay, but sometimes if we have also frequency components in the middle of the frequency component spectrum, then once we eliminate or remove all these components, maybe we will affect the original audio clip because we no longer have such a frequency component anymore. Right, the third type of noise reduction. Before this, we can know the type of noises. Two famous noises. The first one is white noise. Okay, the noise occurs with equal amplitude at all frequencies. Okay, so you can see the x-axis is frequency components from 0 hertz, 100 hertz, 1000 hertz to 10,000 hertz. And then we can measure the amplitude of all frequency components. From this figure, you can see we have similar or very close values for all frequency components. So we call that white noise. Actually, white noise is when you open the television, we have no TV signals, then we will see something like this. Okay, this means we have all frequency components, but the amplitude of all frequency components are almost the same. They have equal amount for all frequency components. We call this white noise. Actually, we have a lot of videos on YouTube with white noises to help us sleep tight. When you lie down in the midnight and you cannot sleep, you can actually play some videos that repeating white noises. So guess what kind of videos contains a lot of white noises? It's not the play of TV when we have no TV signals. You won't see such videos in YouTube. However, we will have another kind of videos that contains a lot of white noises, can help you sleep well. Yeah, that's right. Okay, that's my favorite one because I usually sleep with raining videos and especially heavy rains and with the sounders. Okay, so when you hear that, it's like it's almost typhoon. I need to hide in my bed, and then I'll probably better to get sleep soon. Okay. So next time you can try this. If you cannot sleep, let's play some videos with white noises. Okay, next one, pink noise. Okay, pink noise has equal amplitude inside the octave bands. Okay, so let's see, what is pink noise? Okay, if you have studied the previous video recording, we know we have middle C with a frequency of 261 hertz. So the octave for C is 2 times 261. Okay, so maybe we can draw the frequency analysis view to see what is middle C and its octave band. Okay, so if middle C is 261 hertz, so we have 0 hertz here. And in the end, we have 20,000 hertz. Okay, and then 261 hertz. Okay, and then we have 2 times 261. Okay, so within this band, we have similar amount of amplitude of these frequency components. Okay, so maybe we have another octave and we have other active bands. Once they have equal amount of noises within the octave bands, then we call this pink noises. Okay, the last one of audio restoration is clip pump removal. Okay, let's see the step because this is a very simple method. When we look at a selected portion of audio files, we can detect a sudden amplitude change. For example, we can see when we have the change at this time, we have a sudden drop or a sudden burst of the audio signals. Okay, so that could be noises, and probably it's just noises. Okay, so we can eliminate this change by equaling the sound wave between the start and end point of this clip or pop. Okay, so if the time step is 10 seconds, then we can use the amplitude of 9 seconds and 11 seconds to equate what is the amount or reasonable amount of 10 seconds. Okay, so in that case, we can just replace the amount of this pop or click. Okay, in this case, we use interpolation or calculate averaging of the start or end point. Then we can replace this clip or pop sound. Alright, so that's all about audio restoration. Maybe we can review this method. The first one is noise gating. Okay, once we set the noise threshold, then we can when the background noise is below the threshold, it cannot appear. Okay, that's one way we can reduce the background noises. And then we have noise reduction method. We can analyze the profile of background noises, and then after we apply Fourier transform, we can eliminate the corresponding frequency components. That's the second method we can eliminate or apply audio restoration. The last one, when we have the pop or click signals, just remove it by calculate the interpolation or averaging before and after signals. Then we can know what is reasonable amount of that time segment. Okay, it's all about audio restoration. So when you finish your previous homework assignment, do you have any background noises when you recording yourself? Because usually in a very professional environments, we have very heavy doors and we have very special design walls to prevent background noises. So how you finish your recordings in what environment? Okay, let me choose someone who is silent for the whole semester. Okay, how about you?
I just record my dormitory.
Okay, so is your lens around you?
No, I live alone.
Okay, so you can sing loud.
Not really.
Not really. Okay. So is your environment very quiet or very noisy?
I think it's quiet, but not really quiet.
Okay, thank you. So maybe your recording samples are very good examples for audio restoration because usually we cannot avoid any background noises, even when all classmates are not at the same room. Right? Next, we jump to another topic, digital audio filtering. So it's like image convolution because you have seen a lot of convolution filters to create a different atmosphere of the images. Okay, so we also have audio filters for audio signals. Instead, we have 1D filters for audio processing. Okay, so let's see the definition. Digital audio filter is a linear system that changes the amplitude or phase of one or more frequency components of an audio signal. Okay, so when we apply filters, either we can change the amplitude. For example, when we sing loud, then we have high dynamic range from the loudest part to the softest part. But after we apply the filter, we can change or narrow down the dynamic range of the original audio signal. Okay. Except for amplitude, we can also change the phase of frequency component. So what is the phase of frequency components? Okay, if you forget the definition, maybe you can go to the beginning of Unit 4, I guess. Alright, and then audio filters can apply for a variety of reasons. For example, we can separate the frequency components, just like audio restoration. We need to separate the high frequency components, then we can eliminate all frequency components. We can further analyze frequency components, just like our previous homework assignment. You can analyze your own voice and compare to male or female students. Okay, it's also used for restoration when we have poorly recorded audio recordings. And it's a very common audio processing tools for equalization and spatial effects. Okay, so think of a 2D filtering. We can create a lot of different visual effects by image convolution. Actually, we have the same effects for audio clips. So next time when you hear the singing clips by the singers, professional singers, or the online users, maybe they already apply a lot of different audio filters to enhance their audio clip. So don't think you are singing poor. That's the reason, because other people use a lot of audio filtering to enhance their audio qualities. Okay, so next we will see two types of visual audio filters: finite impulse response filters and infinite impulse response filters. FRI and AR, they are two very common audio filters for audio processing. Okay, so we have very similar mathematical equations for FIR filters because for these times we only apply to 1D signals. Okay, so you can see Xn is our original signals, and we have Hn is our filter. We use this notation to indicate the convolution operations. Okay, and then you can see the index of Hk that the corresponding input data will be x of n minus k. Okay, so maybe we can use the following example to see how filters can be applied to audio clips. Okay, so given these green signals, we have different time stamp, x of 0, x of 1. This is a very long sequence. However, for our filters, it's of limited length of the signals. In this case, it's only 4 by 1. We have h0, h of 1 to h of 3. Okay, and then you can see that they looks like two trends to meet together. So when a trend goes from left to right, and another trend goes from right to left. Okay, so the first meeting point is h0 to x0, and then when it goes close, then we have the corresponding position h of 0 to x of 3. Okay, so when they fully mixed, when they overlapped, then we calculate the corresponding positions. H of 0 times x of 3 plus the second corresponding positions, h of 1 times x of 2. Okay, and we have the filter 4 by 1, so we have 4 different corresponding positions. So you can see it's very similar to 2D convolutions. We just put the 3 by 3 mask to the left top corners of the images, and we calculate the corresponding positions. What is the propagation results, and we calculate the summation over 9 positions. In this case, we have only 1D signals, so we just calculate the corresponding 4 positions here. Okay, so if we go back to the mathematical equation, you can see that's why we have h of k times x of n minus k. Okay, let's see what is infinite impulse response filters. Okay, so it is defined by h of k times x of n minus k, but k is from 0 to infinity. How is that possible? How do we calculate infinity of a filter? Okay, so it's just conceptually infinity because finding the value of Hn for infinity long mass is impossible. So the equation can be transformed to more manageable different equation form. If we consider the previously convolved results, then the recursive form of IR filters can be infinity long. So let's see the definition. When we apply Hn convolved with x of n, we have limited length of filter from k to 1, starting from 1 to n minus 1. Okay, so 8k times x of n minus k, that's FIR. Okay, however, we have the second part because we have another coefficient ek that times 1 of n minus k. Okay, so remember, y of n minus k is what we calculated previously. Okay, so if this is the original signal x, and then we have limited length of filter h. Okay, so in fact, we are calculating the convolution of x and h, but here we have previous results, the convolved results, bk times y of n minus k. That means the filters already convolved with previous x. Okay, so the previous results of x, actually it comes from the previous step of convolution. Okay, so if you really expand the second terms, you can see that will be the filters convolved with previous x. And previous results comes from previous results. Once you expand all these terms, it's conceptually convolving of all previous results. It's very long and conceptually infinite. Okay, so we call this recursive form of IR filters. So if we expand this equation, we have FIR x a0 times xn and a1 times x of n minus 1. And we have the previous terms of b1 times 1 y of n minus 1 and b2 times y of n minus 2 and y of n minus 3. So these previous results are all from previous iterations. Okay, so we call this recursive form. Next, let's see what is filter coefficients. If you remember, when we apply image convolutions, we have 3 by 3 convolved kernels. So what's that numbers comes from? For example, we have Gaussian Blur filters. So we have 4, 2, 2, 2, 2, and 1, 1, 1, 1. How this number comes from? Why do we know the position of this is 1, and in the middle we have 4. Anyone? Okay, it's all from the expertise because the previous researchers have a lot of experiments to see what values will give the best results of image blurring. Okay, so finally they discover the set of numbers as Gaussian blurring filters gives the best results. Okay. Then for 1D kernels, we also have we need to have the values for h of n, the 1D kernels, and we have different names. We call them coefficients, takes, or take weights. Okay, and the number of coefficients is the order of a filter. In our previous example, we have h0, h of 1 to h of 3, so the order of coefficient is 4. However, we can apply longer filters, for example, the order of 10 or 11. Okay, and then if you have the coefficient Hn for a FIR or coefficient AKBK for IR filters, you will perform a filter as a convolution. Okay, so our next question is, how do you determine what h of n should be? So that it changes signal in the way you want. Okay, that's reflect to my original questions. How do we determine 1 to 1 to 4 2? How do we know if we want to apply the convolution for blurring? So we need to have the value of this filter like this. So when we apply 1D filters, we also need to determine what are the weights of h of n, and so that we can achieve our goal, for example, blurring, or create more effects for audio clips. Okay, so we leave this question first because next I would like to introduce impulse and frequency response graph that help us to determine the goal we want to achieve. Okay, so impulse and frequency response, usually we use the notation capital H of Z that represents frequency domain filters. Okay, so when we use H of N, that means we apply these filters in time domain. Okay, so the notation is very important because once you use capital H of Z, that means we apply all these operations in frequency domain. Okay, so that's we are all talking about frequency domain operations. Okay, so we call this frequency response graph that describes how a filter acts on a signal. Okay, so we have 4 types of band filters. The first one is low pass filters. Okay, so by the name low pass filters, it means only low frequency component can pass the filter. Okay, so remember our frequency analysis view, we have 0 Hertz components, or 100 Hertz components, or 10,000 Hertz components. Okay, so once we have different amplitude of these frequency components, what happens if we multiply the amplitude to this low pass filter? Okay, so if you put them closely, you can see the low pass filter tells us only low frequency component, they have the coefficient 1. After this threshold, the coefficients are all cut to 0. Okay, so which means when you multiply the coefficients to the corresponding amplitude of the frequency components, you will have the results like this. Okay, after this threshold, they are all zeros. So when you multiply these coefficients to the amplitude of the frequency components, only low frequency components are allowed to pass the filter. So that's what we call low pass filter. Okay. Similarly, you can also design high pass filter. Okay. So we have coefficient 1 for high frequency components, and we eliminate all frequency components by the coefficient zeros. And then we can also have band pass filter because we call this different bands if we consider the neighboring frequency component as a band. For example, 100 to 200, we call that an active band. Okay, so if we only allow a certain band pass through the filter, then we may have the square graph, a rectangle graph like this. Okay, so we can see out of this band range, the coefficients are all zeros. Only, for example, 100 to 200 hertz, we have coefficient 1. Okay, the last one is band stop filter. That means we select a certain band that we want to eliminate that band. For example, we have 0 coefficients for 100 hertz to 200 hertz. But for the resting, all rest frequency components, they all have coefficient 1s. Okay, so I believe this is very easy. Once you know what is frequency analysis view, then we can design corresponding frequency response graph for different purpose. If you want to preserve the low frequency component or high frequency component or certain band, then we can apply band pass or band stop filters. Okay, next filter is called COM filter. So we add the delay version of wave to itself. Then we can have the audio clip result in phase cancellation. So it sounds like an echo. Okay. So phase cancellation actually eliminates risk components when two sine waves are out of phase with each other sound. Okay. Then we can see this filter. Okay. So the first one is 1/4 echo. So remember, it's IIR filter. So we have AK and BK. So AK, actually we have a very long sequence. The first one is 1, then we have a lot of zeros. And then we have the last component, 0.8. And then we add a delay version of BK. So actually yn equals x of n plus 0.8 times x of n minus 3200 plus y of n minus 1. So you can see for this term the coefficient is 1. For the previous term the coefficient is 1 and 0.8. Okay, so you can see actually y of n minus 1 is added to the version of y of n. So this produces the effects of echo. So that's here.
What movies have you seen recently?
Okay, once we apply COM filters with 1/4 echo.
What movies have you seen recently?
Okay, so you can actually see it sounds like an echo because when we have a delayed version added to its original one, it just sounds like an echo. Okay, and then we can have a filter of multiple fold echo. So let's see this equation. Yn equals xn plus y of n minus 1. So it's the same from the previous one. And then we minus 0.8 times y of n minus 3200. Okay, so we add a recent previous results y of n minus y. And we minus a long ago y of n minus 3200. Okay, that's here the results.
What movies have you seen recently? What movies have you seen recently?
Okay, so you can see the delay is so significant. So it's like multiple or fold of echoes. And we have the name count filters because when we see the frequency response filters, the figure like this. Okay, so you can see the shape of a frequency response graph, just like the shape of a cone. So when you brush your hair every day. Okay, next let's see other famous audio processing filters. So we already see bandpass filters and some IR filters, count filters, and we also have convolution filters as related to FIR filters. Right? Except for convolution, we also have other tools to help us to accomplish audio processing. For example, graphic equalizer or parametric equalizer. Okay, so we will see this. Okay, next one is called shelving filters. Okay, shelving filters are similar to low-high pass filters, except they boost or cut frequency up to a certain frequency. Okay, so by this figure, you can see we call this low shift boosting. That means we boost the original frequency component to up to a certain level, especially if we apply boosting to lower shift of the frequency components. So you can see if we apply 1, okay, that means we have no changes to all frequency components. However, we have different level 1, level 2 to level 5. Then we have different curve. That means for low frequency components, they have different coefficients. So if we have level 5, that means the component 0 Hertz has the highest coefficients. And the coefficient degrade gradually. Okay, but for low frequency components, you can see their coefficients are all boosted. Okay, so for the second part, high shift boosting, that means we're trying to boost all frequency components in high frequency range. So we can see if we set this point, above this point we have high frequency components. You can see its coefficient is set to higher and higher by different level, boost level 1 to level 5. Okay, except for boosting, we can also apply cutting. Okay, so low shift cutting, that means the coefficient we have the original coefficient 1. Then we apply lower and lower coefficients to low frequency components. Okay, so we call this low shift cutting. So the last one is high shift cutting. We cut the coefficients to lower levels for high frequency components. Okay, so you don't have to remember this based on the name low shift boost or low shift cutting. Then you will understand the meaning. Maybe you can draw your figures by yourself. The next one, I believe you are very familiar with this equalization. Okay, so in short, we call that EQ. Actually, we can, this is a visualization tool. We have this UI, and we can boost or cut certain frequency directly by this UI. Okay, because by this equalization EQ, the interface will provide different frequency components for us. For example, we have 1K Hertz components, 2K Hertz components, and you can adjust the spool bar up and down. That means we're trying to boost or cut that frequency component. Okay, so we have a question here because you can see the frequency component we have, for example, 63, and we have 125 and 250. That's just 2 times the previous frequency. Okay, so actually we are trying to adjust a different octave bands. Okay, so in this case, if the starting point is 31.5 hertz, and we end at 16k hertz, and we have 10 different frequency components we can adjust. So how to design EQ with 20 bands if their distance are equal? Okay, so are you considering, for example, 500 plus 1000 divided by 2? So we have 750 hertz. So we can integrate another frequency component, 750 hertz, between these 2 components. Okay, if you are thinking of this, then that's a wrong design because the bands are separated by half an octave. Okay, so if you remember, we have x times x times x times x, and we times 12 times, then we can move from one octave to next octave. Okay, so once we need to increase the band from 10 to 20, then we need to consider the square roots of 2. Okay, so then we multiply the frequency component by the square root of 2. So next band will be 44 hertz. And 44 hertz times the square root of 2, it will be 63 hertz here. Okay, actually in the middle, when we need equal distance of these bands, then we need to multiply the square root of 2. Okay, so next one is peaking filter. So ideally, band pass filter for the unwanted frequency will be filtered out entirely, but in reality, it's impossible because the frequency response looks like the beta shape. So the type of filter they sometimes call a peaking filter. Okay, so if you compare this to band pass filter, we are talking about an ideal band pass filter, just like this. Right? So this is the band, for example, 100 hertz to 200 hertz. That's the band we want to preserve. Okay, so we have a square or rectangular response graph here, but that's an ideal band pass filter. In reality, actually, we need something like the Bell curve. So we call this peaking filter. Okay, let's jump to a very important theorem about convolution. Because we are talking about frequency domain, we are applying capital H of Z to the magnitude of frequency component. So when we need to transform to time domain, we need the help of convolution theorem. Okay, so let's see the theorem first. If we have the results, if we apply discrete Fourier transform to let h of n to be capital H of n, this is the result of frequency component of frequency domain because we apply Fourier transform. Okay, and then we also have the original signal in time domain S of n, where we apply Fourier transform to frequency domain. Then we will have capital S of z. So the convolution theorem tells us if we apply convolution for h of n to x of n, then the result is equivalent to frequency domain h of z times x of z. Okay, so now you know it's not convolution anymore. It's just multiplication. in frequency domain. But the results is equivalent to h of n and s of n when we apply convolution in time domain. Okay, so this is a very important theorem. We call that convolution theorem. So let's see this figure. Maybe we can have more clear picture of these operations. If we have audio clips x of n in time domain, that's the recording. For example, you are using audio recorders to record your own voice. Then we have the audio clips of time domain. Then we have the convolution kernels h of n, just like, for example, 4x1 kernels. Then we can apply convolutions x of n convolve with h of n. Then we can get the convolution results y of n in time domain. Okay, so instead of this, you can go another path. You can transform xn by discrete Fourier transform to capital X of z, and you can also transform h of n by discrete Fourier transform to capital H of z. Then when we transform these two to frequency domain, then we only multiply x of z to h of z to get capital Y of z. Okay, so convolution theorem tells us when we multiply these two in frequency domain, the result is equivalent to the convolution of x of n and h of n in time domain. So once we have capital Y of z, remember it's still in frequency domain. So we need to apply inverse discrete Fourier transform to transform capital Y of z back to time domain Y of n. Okay, so next time, actually you have two different options. You can apply convolutions in time domain directly to get Y of n. Otherwise, you can also have another path, transform to frequency component, and transform back from frequency domain to time domain. Okay, so I hope you can understand this because we are talking about the filter response graph, right? For low pass filter, high pass filter, or band pass filter, we are talking about this filter. We have different weight, right? The weight is 1, otherwise the weight is 0. We can time the original frequency component amplitude. This is 0 hertz. This is, for example, 10,000 hertz. When we apply convolution, actually we just multiply these values to the values of frequency components. We have no convolution in frequency domain. Actually, just multiplication of the corresponding weights to the amplitude of the frequency component. Okay, next, let's see. In ideal low-pass filter frequency, we know the graph, response graph like this. So it's an ideal low-pass filter because we have 0 here, we have 2 pi here. Only the frequency component around 0 is allowed to pass. They have the coefficient 1. Okay, and then in this graph, we have angular frequency on the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis represent the fraction of each frequency components. Okay, and we can set a cutoff frequency omega c, which in angular unit. So this is the threshold we are setting omega c, because when we represent the frequency components, we use 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so omega c is also in angular unit. Okay, then remember, this is the representation of FIR filters in frequency domain. So have you wondered what it looks like in time domain? Okay, So remember how to transform this back to time domain. We need to apply inverse discrete Fourier transform. Then we can transform this graph back to time domain. Actually, it's what it looks like. Okay. So originally we have rectangle functions, but when we transform back to time domain, we call this a sig function. Okay, so you can see the sig function is very complicated because it equals sine of x divided by x when x is not 0. Okay, so in addition, it's an infinity function. Okay, so you can see it's not easy. If once you have these functions, it's not easy to apply h of x to x of n because we have infinity FIR filters. When we transform the square filter response graph into time domain. Okay, so I hope this example gives you the idea why we need convolution theorem. Because sometimes when we apply convolutions to audio clips, it's not easy to apply convolution in time domain. However, it will be much easier when we apply the same equations or convolutions in frequency domain. Okay, so let's see the twins or identity functions of these low pass, high pass, band pass filters to its time domain parameters. Okay, so you can see we have so complicated equations. When we represent the same equation in time domain, we have a very complicated cutoff functions. Okay, next, let's see. If we have a same function goes infinity to positive and negative directions, then how can we implement such FR filters? Okay, so ideally we can apply the frequency domain with the ideal rectangle response graph by multiplications. However, if we really want to apply convolutions in time domain, okay, we still have ways to accomplish our goal. One way is to multiply the ideal impulse response by a windowing function. Okay, so the purpose of windowing function is to make impulse response finite. If the FIR filters is infinity, then we cannot apply convolution anymore. So we need a windowing function to cut the infinity filters to infinity size. Okay. However, once we apply windowing functions, we are cutting some coefficients. Okay. This makes the impulse response filters result in a frequency response that is less than ideal and contains ripples. Okay. So let's see. So remember the shape of a sig function. We have the curve like this. Okay, so we know this is infinity. It's not possible to apply this h of n to the original audio clip. So we apply a windowing function, for example, this one. We set the cutoff frequency, for example, omega c here. And then we cut all this coefficient out. Okay, we only have this finite filters. Then we can use this to convolve with x of n. Right? But it tells us if you cut all these frequencies, after you transform these results back to frequency domain, then you can see it's not ideal pass filter. Ideally, it should like this, right? But after you cut this frequency, and you transform this back to time or frequency domain, you will see figures like this. Okay, originally it's band pass filter or low pass filter in this case. So it should be a square response graph. But if you cut the sync function from infinity to finite, then actually we are applying the band pass filter, not ideal or not identical to the original low pass filter. Okay, so you can consider this as an approximation method. Once you want to apply your convolution in time domain, then we can still do this, but we have some noises or some errors because our filters are not the same. Okay, next let's see the windowing function. Actually, we have a lot of different choices. For example, Hamming window function, or Blackman window function. Okay, so let's see this example, how we apply windowing function for FIR filters. Okay, so this is a very simple module. We have input FC, it will be a cutoff frequency, because we know low pass filter is a sync filter, sync function in time domain. So we need to cut here. So here it's not omega C. In this example, we set this to FC, cutoff frequency. Okay, and then we have the sampling frequency of the audio signal in hertz. We call that F sample. And then we have the order of filters N. Okay, so the order of the filter is N. All right. After we have this, then we apply this module as convolution, especially for FIR filters. Then the output will be a low-pass FIR filters of N element array. Okay, so let's see how we transform the square graph into a low-pass filter, especially FIR filter. Okay, the first thing is to normalize XC and omega C such that the pi equal to the Nyquist angular frequency. So we have SC, we normalize FC by dividing F samples. That will be our sample frequency. Okay, in omega C we use 2 pi times F. Remember we have introduced this equation before. The angular frequency equals 2 pi F. So if we have cutoff frequency FC, then we times 2 pi to transform to angular frequency. And the middle position, because the total length is N, so the middle position will be N divided by 2. Okay, and then we have a for loop here, enumerate from N from minus N divided by 2 to N divided by 2. Okay, so that means for the middle position is N divided by 2. So we starting from the left position to the middle. Okay, so if N equals to 0, then we apply the filter, we make the value to 1. Okay, because you can see for the top of this big function, the value is 1. Okay, so when N is 0, we set to 1 directly. Otherwise, we can use N plus the middle to other positions, and we use the sync function we have introduced like 2 slides ago. 2 times pi times f of c times n divided by pi times n. So that will be our sync function. Okay, so actually we are trying to calculate the coefficients for all positions from minus n divided by 2 to n divided by 2. Okay, and then by this for loop, we can calculate the coefficient for these filters. Okay, and then next step is to apply windowing function because we have infinity coefficients for these FIR filters. So the last step is to times the windowing function So we have the values for our window function. Once we have different positions, then we have different values we can extract from the window function. We just use the values times the window function, okay, and then we can have our final results after we apply the window function. Okay, so that's how we apply filters to audio clips. Okay, so you can see the major difference of filtering method when we compare audio to images. Because we didn't talk about how we apply image convolutions in frequency domain. However, for audio convolutions, it usually applied in frequency domain. So we have introduced, for time domain, we have the equation of FIR filters. We have the equation for IIR filters. Actually, this is applied in time domain. However, when we introduce different types of filters, we are transferring from time domain to frequency domain. So we have a different frequency response graph to help us preserve different frequency components. Okay, so you may not familiar with this method. However, we provide the theorem of convolutional theorem. Okay, so once you have the convolutional theorem, then we can transform the convolution results from frequency domain back to time domain. Okay, then we can switch back and forth. Then you can apply convolutions either in time domain or frequency domain. 好，那我们看看这个部分，同学们有没有什么问题？知道我在讲什么吗？好，我们找一个同学帮我们 summarize 一下好了。好，我们刚刚讲的这个 digital audio filter 的部分，好，有没有同学帮我们摘要一下我们刚刚上课讲的哪一些概念？好，我们那个学期已经快要结束了哦，这个大家发言的机会越来越少了，好，所以我们要好珍惜这个发言的机会啊。后面的小红帽同学好不好？好，对，就是你啊，脱掉已经来得及了哈。好，要不要帮我们摘要一下，用中文讲一下刚刚那个讲的哪些事情？什么都可以。任何一点点 IP 都可以。好，没关系哈。旁边蓝色的先生要救援一下吧。你是绿色哦，我讲的不是你。好，蓝色的同学有没有救援一下？嗯。好，就这样子是。好。你呢？可以啊，好啊。好，希望整理一下，对不对？好，先讲一下好了。那个，你觉得在影像上面做convolution跟audio上面做convolution，我们上课讲的主要不一样在哪里？如果都要做convolution的话，好，最简单的影像的convolution是二维的嘛，对不对？好，那 audio 的 convolution 是一维的，所以你是拿一个一维的向量跟 audio 的资料做 convolution， 但是影像你是拿一个3×3的矩阵跟一个2维的影像做 convolution， 这个就是最基本的不一样了。好，那第二个不一样呢，就是我们前面在介绍影像 convolution 的时候，都是在 spatial domain 来做，就是2维矩阵做 convolution。但是我们今天介绍 audio 的 convolution 的时候，实际上它几乎都是在 frequency domain 来做。好，那所以 frequency domain 的 convolution 怎么做？frequency domain 的 convolution 要怎么做？如果我们有一个 convolution 的 kernel， 然后我们有一段 input 的 audio signal， 它要怎么样在 frequency domain 做 convolution？
先用那个副业，然后做一个自己的相机。
好，非常好，就是这样好。那个我们在 frequency domain 做 convolution 的时候，你只要直接把原本的这个 h 我们的 convolution kernel 跟原本的 x 就是我们 time domain 的 x 的资料，直接用傅立叶转换，把这两个东西一起转到 frequency domain， 转过去之后呢，就直接两个相乘，它就是 convolution 的结果了，而不用真的照我们讲的 convolution 需要点对点相乘再相加。好，那所以我们刚刚介绍的非常多的 convolutional 的 kernel， 实际上都是 frequency domain 的 kernel。让同学们看到的，不论是这些 frequency response graph 的 filter， 或者是这边的 count filter， 或者是我们后面介绍的 low shift、high shift、counting 或 boosting 的 kernel， 这些全部都是 frequency 的 kernel。所以你只要把这个值直接跟我们的原始的影像的 frequency 的那些amplitude 乘在一起，它就是等于是做完 convolution 了。你只要把这乘完的值再用 inverse 傅立叶转换转回去，好，它就相当于你在 time domain 做 frequency 做 convolution。好，那大家有没有什么其他的问题？有没有哪个地方我们可以再用中文讲给大家听的？好，有问题吗？好，没有问题的话，我们就上到这边了。好，下礼拜再见。
我边记得照回来哦。
好，那个刚刚有同学来问问题所以我们可能接下来又会多送几分给同学。好，所以记得要把考卷交回来否则就会丧失加分的机会了。
理论上，因为它比赛中要治疗，那个上面还有好几个页。你看你要不要在那个公告上，我觉得今天好像还有。晚上还有5个。 没有。